All right, Feige. Let's do this right.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Hey, travelers. Welcome back to Roberto's Room. So, as you're probably aware, there have been a lot of news surrounding what is going on at Marvel Studios. Arguably what has been going on since Avengers Endgame. And I got to thinking, there are some very easy fixes that can really make phases 4, 5, and now 6 very cohesive. And I thought, let me have a try at handling my own version of phases 4 and 5. I actually broke it down to 2 phases, and I want to tell y'all what I would do, what I would change. I actually tried to leave a lot of the same projects that have already been announced. I've cut a lot to kind of streamline the MCU and really make it so that each show or each movie, I do have the shows still in there, just not as many, build into one another and have it be more cohesive. I think that is one of the biggest problems that is plaguing the MCU of today, is that as much as it wants to, a lot of the current shows and movies are just not cohesive. There are people that we haven't seen in ages, and we don't know when they will be back, and with Secret Wars and Doomsday looming on the horizon, some of these characters I don't even know will see the light of day. So I kind of have tailored my MCU starting really at the end of phase 3 with where Endgame left off, and I want to share with y'all what I would do for phases 4 and 5. This video will cover phase 4, and then I will be doing another video about phase 5, which will close out the Multiverse Saga of the MCU. Before we get started though, if you would, please hit that like button, please drop a comment, and as well, if you are not subscribed, please subscribe. I would love to have you along for the ride and continue making videos like these. I have a lot more videos coming up, and I would love to have you on board for the ride.
Smile, everyone! We're back.
So without further ado, let's get to it. I actually start my MCU in phase 3, kind of as an epilogue to Endgame. We know that we had Far From Home, but I think it was a real misfire not having Black Widow also in 2019. Since COVID didn't really have an effect until 2020, I put my Black Widow film in November 22 of 2019. And by the way, all of the streaming shows and as well the movies have release dates as well. So starting, of course, phase 3 of the post-Endgame MCU with Spider-Man Far From Home, I would keep it as is with no changes, really dwelling on the loss of Tony Stark to the MCU and having it really be a bookend to his story. But I wanted to also add as well in there Black Widow, which I have releasing on November 22nd, 2019, with Far From Home keeping its release date of July 2nd, 2019. Black Widow, though, I do have a few changes that I did want to talk about, which I think would actually benefit a lot of the negatives that Black Widow had, starting, of course, with the introduction of Anthony Mastera. Of course, this is a Russian version of Tony Masters, who I actually have as another secret son of Dreykov, who ends up taking the shield of Taskmaster. I actually have Antonia dying in Black Widow and having in a mid-credit scene reveal him and Antonia to be siblings, with Anthony taking up the Taskmaster moniker, restoring Tony Masters, who really is Taskmaster, to the MCU. I don't have an actor for Taskmaster, but I figured you guys could go crazy in the comments with some of these new castings that I've done. For the post-credit scene of Black Widow, and again, a lot of these movies, I've tried to keep all of the movies that have been released so far. I have a few changes, but I tried to tailor especially the mid and post-credit scenes to the wider MCU, and that's where the post-credit scene comes in. In my post-credit scene, I actually kept it very similar to the post-credit scene of Black Widow originally, where you have Valentina Allegra de Fontaine which is visiting Yelena Belova at Romanoff's grave. DeFontaine blames Romanoff's death on Barton, and that is going to lead into the Hawkeye show, which I do have in my MCU as well, and assigns him as Yelena Belova's next target, much like we saw in the regular MCU. So starting in Phase 4 is where my MCU changes drastically, because my MCU Phase 4 actually begins with Eternals, but not as a film. I actually have it to be a Disney Plus show running from April 6, 2021 to June 8th, 2021 with 8 episodes. The first 5 of those episodes concentrating on 2 of the Eternals. As we know, there are 10 Eternals in the film. I kept the lineup as is, and 2 of the Eternals kind of get the spotlight in each of the first 5 episodes, with the final act culminating in what we saw in the film with the Celestial Tiamat rising up from the ground and them stopping it, resulting in Celestial Island, which will build into the next film in my MCU, which is Captain America: Brave New World. I think one of the great disservices to Sam Wilson's character in the MCU was not to have him be front and center in a film, and instead giving him just a show which arguably nobody watched. So I gave him a film, and really the first film of Phase 4, because he is Captain America, and if we're going to buy into him, we need to have him in the MCU. But before I dive into that film, I just want to mention that as well. The Eternal show is going to build into something later, which I have planned down the road as we build up to Doctor Doom. And again, as we go through my Phase 4 and Phase 5, please understand that mine is very different. Phase 4 actually is going to lead up to Kang. I still have Kang, and I know what happened with Jonathan Majors, but in my world, I would say recast him and still have Kang, and then build up Doom later on. But again, Brave New World, which I would release on July 2nd, 2021. And in my version of Brave New World, I actually have a lot of the plot threads that were discussed and explored in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, but streamlined here. I think that Sam Wilson should struggle with his calling to be Captain America, and I have no problem with him rejecting the shield as he did in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. However, with President Ross still in my version of the film, naming US Agent as the new Captain America, and having both of these characters really go on parallel journeys. I think meanwhile, just like we saw in Brave New World, we see Ross going to see someone in jail, and of course we know this is the leader, but in my film we would kind of keep him shrouded in mystery, and still having him get the pills to set up the Red Hulk reveal, but we're going to keep that as a secret. We're not going to put that in all over the marketing, which I think was one of the things that Brave New World really suffered from, was having Red Hulk front and center. Because in my film, since you have the conflict between Japan and the United States, I actually chose to introduce a proto version of Silver Samurai, teasing, of course, the X-Men moving forward, and of course, Silver Samurai having been made of adamantium, which is introduced with the Celestial Island. I still have the Serpent Society here. Unlike with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, there are no flag smashers here. But what I did have with the Serpent Society is that they are going to rise to power while Sam has rejected the shield. And this actually is a cause for Sam to pick up the shield, seeing them rise to power. Betty Ross is also a bigger part of my version of Brave New World, with her actually having helped her dad run for president and win, as being part of his campaign, using that to rebuild their relationship. So that way, when you do have a moment where, yes, of course, Sam Wilson can't beat Red Hulk, I'm sorry, there's no world that would happen, Betty Ross actually comes in, and you have a built-in relationship throughout the film, which would help to justify that moment at the end of the film. We, again, don't have the Flag Smashers in my version of Brave New World, and I do have the Serpent Society present, having them rise to power. I would have them in more kind of a serpent-like suits, or something that is harkening back to the comic book accurate Serpent Society, having them fight U.S. agent, and just like in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, something happens where U.S. agent, who is declining mentally after having taken a new version of the super soldier serum, kills one of the members of the Serpent Society in a blind rage. He, of course, loses the mantle of Captain America, and this brings Sam, who we saw introduced as a VA counselor, who is trying to mentor U.S. agent. U.S. agent, kind of being cocky and prideful, rejects him, and feeling rejected by everyone after his killing of the Serpent Society member. He just wants to do things on his own. He doesn't go to jail, but he is disgraced and dishonorably discharged from the military, and we see him kind of where we pick him up later on in my version of the Thunderbolts, which will be coming later. Sam gets visited by the Wakandans, I would say after the midpoint of the film. I would say the midpoint of the film is where U.S. agent kills the member of the Serpent Society and gets stripped of his title. This prompts Sam, who sees what happened with U.S. agent and actually justifying his reason not to take a super soldier serum, gets visited by the Wakandans that gift him the new suit. I would also have Bucky in this film as well, like in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, who visits him and encourages him to be a Captain America that people can aspire to be, since he doesn't want to take up the serum. In my version of the film, though, the film quote-unquote ends with Sam going up against the Serpent Society and the Silver Samurai, as the Serpent Society, after getting beat by U.S. agent and having one of their members killed, go to Japan and team up with them and get a really big upgrade on their suits. Sam, of course, takes out most of the members of the Serpent Society, and Silver Samurai kind of recedes into the night. We're going to see him later on as we build up the X-Men part of the MCU. But the twist ending in my film, kind of like what was in Brave New World, is that the leader is revealed to be poisoning Ross with gamma-radiated pills. However, I want my film to focus more on the Silver Samurai and Serpent Society, so that when you do see Ross finally turn into the Red Hulk, of course, it's more of a gut punch, and you're like, oh wow, this was actually surprising, as this is kind of a fourth act for Brave New World. In the mid-credit scene, I would actually have the scene of Xu Wenwu, who we know is the Mandarin, quote-unquote, of Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings, as that is the next film. And I want that scene of him marching up to the army and releasing the 10 rings as kind of a tease for what is to come. And then the post-credit scene, kind of like we saw in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, of Valentina Allegra de Fontaine visiting John Walker, aka US Agent, and offering him a chance at redemption, which he accepts. And again, as you notice, the mid-credit scenes are pointing to what's coming right up next, and the post-credit scenes are building up to something. Of course, in my MCU, we're building up to my version of the Thunderbolts, and we will be building up to more things later. I like Shang-Chi as is. I love that movie, and I think it should stay as is, including the post-credit and mid-credit scenes. I think they were really interesting for teases of what is to come, especially with my MCU Phase 4 building up to Kang. I think that we should keep that as is, as well as Loki Season 1. I would say the only difference that I would have between my Loki Season 1, which in my MCU, Shang-Chi would release on September 3rd, 2021, and Loki Season 1 would be from October 5th to November 9th, 2021. I would have more of an emphasis on Loki's story. You could still have Sylvie in there, but have her be less of a main player. Of course, I am not one to buy into the whole diversity, equity, and inclusion, blah, 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 that the MCU is suffering from. I think that is one of the biggest things that the MCU is suffering from. So in building my MCU, of course, we're going to excise all of that, and we're not going to have any of that in my MCU. But I do like him meeting He Who Remains and actually killing He Who Remains as well, because of course we know it was supposed to be a cycle where He Who Remains would have ended up on the throne anyway because of what Loki did. And in my show, it is Loki, not Sylvie, that kills He Who Remains. leading to, of course, his decision in season 2, which we'll talk about a little bit later, to taking up the throne at the end of time and bringing together the multiverse to try to protect it. That is a decision that he makes out of guilt for having killed He Who Remains, and really starting off this whole multiversal mess that is prevalent in Phase 4. Next, on December 17th, 2021, which I kept the same premiere date as the current MCU, is Spider-Man No Way Home. I would keep the film the same, even teasing Venom with the mid-credit scene. However, at the post-credit scene, what I would do is have Kang visit the leader who escaped at the end of Brave New World and offering him knowledge on the multiverse. I think this will go a long way with what I have planned for not just the leader, but also for Kang later on down the road. Black Panther Wakanda Forever, I would have as releasing on February 18th, 2022. Keep the film the same. I really have no changes for this film, and I would honestly just keep the after credit scenes the same. I think this was a movie that was more about paying respects to Chadwick Boseman, and I think that it does a really good job at that. I really have no notes. I would really even keep Riri Williams, as I am building up to a Young Avengers film, which we'll see later on down in the lineup. But next, running from March to April 2022, I would have WandaVision. Again, we are still building the universe. My version of WandaVision, however, does not have Agatha Harkness. I would instead give the fans what they want and have Mephisto pulling the strings in the background. Actually, he was the one in my version of WandaVision who gave Wanda the Darkhold and is using Wanda for his own ends. I didn't like the heel turn to villain that they gave to Wanda, and in my MCU, we're going to correct that a little bit. We're still going to kind of have her as the villain of WandaVision and still have her do the same things, but we're going to see, especially as we go into my version of Multiverse of Madness, how really it's a tragic story, and we're not going to lean so much into the villain side of the Scarlet Witch, because I think that did a disservice to the character overall. I think that WandaVision should be a exploration of grief as somebody who has lost everything, and I think that WandaVision, as it was in, what we saw, really does a disservice to Wanda, so I really want to redeem her character. Next up on the lineup, May 28th, 2022, we do not have Thor Love and Thunder, as I did not like what they did, but I called it Thor, The End of Divinity. I still loved having Gore in the film, but Gore really needed to do a lot more than he did in this movie. I don't mind Jane being in the movie and having a lot of the same things that we saw in the film, but I would tone down the zaniness and have it be more of a serious thing where we really don't know if Thor's going to make it out. I think Gore was severely underused, especially having a great actor like Christian Bale play him, and I really want to give him more of an opportunity to shine and have it really be a showdown between Thor and Gore the God Butcher, where Thor, having battled his inner demons as he did in Endgame and really having come out of it in a really healthy spot, helps to really be the hero protecting the gods from Gore the God Butcher, and really none of that Love and Thunder garbage. I would still, in the movie though, have Thor cause the death of Zeus while fighting Gore. I think it should be something that's more incidental and not direct, but I still want to set up a Hercules versus Thor film, which I actually do have in my Phase 5, which we'll talk about soon. For my mid-credit scene of Thor, End of Divinity, I would have a scene where the Earth 838 Scarlet Witch is being watched by our universe's Wanda, of course leading into Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And for the post-credit scene, I would keep it the same as it was in Thor Love and Thunder, where Hercules, who now blames Thor for his father's death, vows revenge. I still am leading up to another Thor film. I want Thor to be serious. I hate campy Thor, and I think End of Divinity and War of the Gods, which is the other Thor film that we'll talk about later, really have him step into that more serious role. I still kept I Am Groot in there. It's a little show in the MCU, but it is leading up to Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and I feel like, man, it's kind of cute, and I left it in there in August 2022. And I also kept Werewolf by Night. There are a couple of things that even though they're kind of disjointed and detached from what's going on, I kept in there as things that you could explore after the Multiversal Saga, and I think Werewolf by Night was a really strong show. In my MCU, it would be released on October 4th, 2022, and I would keep it exactly the same with Man-Thing and everything that was included in there. I thought that was a fantastic show, directed by the genius composer turned director Michael Giacchino, and I have no notes. That was a perfect show in my opinion, and I loved every second of it. Next, we have on October 21st, just in time for the Halloween season, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Of course, here we get to see Mephisto in his full glory, who, having manipulated Wanda, unleashes his full power through the Scarlet Witch and is really controlling her in the background while siphoning her powers, kind of using her as a battery, if you will, to increase his strength. We still have America Chavez in there, again, as I'm building up to a Young Avengers film, and Wanda still exploring the grief that was explored in WandaVision, desires her children, and dreamwalks just like she did in the film. Wanda ends up in Earth 838 and kills all of the Illuminati except for Mordo. And then before the final act, there's a little scene that I wanted to include since all of the Earth 838 Illuminati get killed. We see somebody approach Mordo who asked who killed Xavier. And this is actually revealed to be Magneto, who I would still have as Sir Ian McKellen, who vows to find and kill the Scarlet Witch for what she did to Professor X. However, my version of Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness ends with Doctor Strange, Wong, Wanda, and America Chavez teaming up against Mephisto and exiling him to the Dark Dimension, or so they think, at the end of the film. I still like the mid-credit scene where Clea appears and recruits Doctor Strange to fix the incursions that he caused in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, as a lot of the film is still the same. The only difference, like I said, is have Mephisto pulling the strings behind Wanda and not having her actually be the villain. And the post-credit scene, I have changed a lot, where Kang actually shows up to Shang-Chi, and Shang-Chi tries to defend himself by using the 10 rings, but kind of going along with the tease that we saw at the end of his film, where the bangle of Ms. Marvel and his rings are actually ancient artifacts that I think, if you kept along with the story, belonged to Kang. Kang actually uses this opportunity and steals the rings from Shang-Chi, leaving Shang-Chi kind of frozen in time. He manipulates time to freeze him, take the rings, and leaves Shang-Chi there, who is just in anger at what has just transpired. Next, in 2023, from January 3rd to February 7th, 2023, we have the Ms. Marvel show, who we keep the same. I liked that show. I thought it was really nice, and I loved Iman Vellani's take. I think it would be good, especially as in my MCU, the next film to release is on March 17th, 2023, The Marvels, which I am going to change drastically from the Marvels that we saw in the MCU proper. In my version, I would have it be more of a Civil War type film with a few Avengers showing up, kind of as a pre-Avengers Kang Dynasty, where we have some of the Avengers rallying together to defend Kamala, who is trying to find the origins of her bangle, which is where the show kind of left off. And she calls out to Kang, kind of on accident, just like with Shang-Chi at the end of his film, who answers and actually tries to steal Kamala's bangle. However, as she tries to fend him off, Carol shows up and fends off Kang long enough for both of them to escape. I think this movie should revolve around the Marvels. Again, Monica Rambeau, Captain Marvel, and Ms. Marvel fighting to keep the bangle away from Kang, who intends to use it to split the multiverse wide open, using it, his bangle, and the 10 rings together. The movie ends with Photon, of course, who is Monica Rambeau, trapped in an alternate dimension, just like we saw at the end of the Marvels. And this is caused, of course, with Kang opening up a rift in space-time and sending Photon through it at the end of the film. Kang gets a hold of the bangle from Kamala, and Carol Danvers meeting with Bruce Banner and Shang-Chi to form a team to go after Kang. The mid-credit scene would have Monica awaken in Earth 838, meeting Beast and her mother, who survived Wanda's attack when she attacked the Illuminati in Multiverse of Madness. Again, we are building all things together. Everything is cohesive. The post-credit scene reveals the Council of Kangs. I'm going to actually take the after-credit scene of Quantumania and put it here, revealing the Council of Kangs as a group of Kang variants discussing Kang the Conqueror's rise, who we saw in the Marvels in that very film. They are assembling to prepare for their multiversal war. However, Kang the Conqueror shows up in this end credit scene and declares himself, now armed with the bangle and the 10 rings, and asks who will declare their allegiance to Kang the Conqueror, which of course leads into May 5th, 2023, to Avengers Kang Dynasty. And this one, of course, we never got to see in our MCU, but I would have Kang the Conqueror now armed with the bangles and the 10 rings, along with the Kang variants who sided with him, preparing to enslave the multiverse. I would have the film open up where the Marvel's after credit scene left off, with Kang the Conqueror killing all but a few of his variants who swear fealty to him. Of course, we know that the variants are all out for themselves. However, they do team up with him for the time being. Monica Rambeau, who is stuck in an alternate dimension, is causing an incursion there while trying to find a way home. Shang-Chi meets with Bruce Banner and Wong, who contact Sam Wilson and the Guardians of the Galaxy, as well as Bucky Barnes, to try to fight Kang and the variants that are coming. A multiversal war erupts with different Avengers teams fighting off different Kang variants, but this is not a lot of people. We have just a stripped down version because they were really unprepared for the arrival of the Kang variant. So it's really a film where they are caught on the back foot by Kang and his invasion. Some of the mainline Avengers travel to Earth 838 and try to get Monica Rambeau back, teaming up with the X-Men to fight off Kang. In my version of 838, of course, just like we have Ian McKellen as Magneto and Patrick Stewart as Professor X, I would have a lot of the original Fox actors kind of taking a page from the casting of Doomsday, having them team up with our Avengers to fend off the Kang variants. In the last act, as the Kang variants are being dealt with, the Scarlet Witch does show up in Earth 838, and of course, having set up Magneto's want to destroy, Scarlet Witch goes after her, allowing Kang to escape. And we end up in a really good moment with Scarlet Witch where she comes clean with Magneto and tells what happened. And Magneto, who I think this would actually be a really good thematic moment, because as you know, Magneto's history is littered with him being controlled in his younger days by the Nazis, and really has a soft spot for what Wanda went through, especially with all of her grief. And really, I think would result in a really nice and dramatic and heartfelt moment in the midst of this war. Of course, Kang retreats to fight another day, and the mid-credit scene of Avengers Kang Dynasty would have Kang the Conqueror, who retreats from the battle to gain his strength, arriving in a different universe, the Fantastic Four universe, but he is greeted by a dark figure, who of course is Doctor Doom. And I wanted to kind of recreate the panel of Doctor Doom and Thanos, where he pulls out Thanos' spine, but have it with Kang the Conqueror here stating to Kang, "And you call yourself a conqueror?" Kind of to set up, okay, Kang just really dealt a blow with the Avengers, and now there's this other threat. I want to really take the time to set up Doctor Doom properly. And then the post-credit scene, I actually have it very similar to another post-credit scene that we've already seen in the MCU, where Loki and Mobius track another Kang variant, Victor Timely, in the early 1900s, setting up the events of Loki Season 2, which will be soon. I also have I Am Groot Season 2, which will be in August 2023. But here's where we kind of deviate a little bit with my MCU. As September 1st, 2023, we have, I called it either Ant-Man, the Wasp, and Stature, or the alternate title would be Ant-Man and the Wasp, MODOK Rises. I would have this film open up with George Tarleton, who was discovered to be an underling of Aldrich Killian, calling back to Iron Man 3, who is in the battle of Kang Dynasty and discovers one of Kang's multiversal weapons, wanting to experiment on it and really rise up the ranks of AIM. So I did want to bring back AIM really with this film. However, the experiments with the Kang tech ultimately mutate him and break him into the form of MODOK. And because Ant-Man was actually a part of Kang Dynasty, I would have him kind of blame Ant-Man indirectly for his transformation into MODOK, and him going after Cassie, who is now named Stature, as her superhero counterpart. And I want this film to have kind of a psychological dread to it, because we have Cassie, who is being mentally manipulated, tormented in her sleep by someone she doesn't know, and she doesn't really know what it is, and something's controlling her from the shadows, which of course is MODOK, George Tarleton, who has the psychokinetic and psionic powers. Tarleton is buried after they kind of sort through the rubble and find his body after the events of Kang Dynasty. However, he actually emerges from the grave, having broken out with his newfound psionic powers, and discovers that the multiversal radiation breaks his mind and mutates him into MODOK. MODOK is tracked down by the leader, who we last saw in Brave New World, having gone through his own genetic changes, and offers to help MODOK to discover his powers and to help focus them, of course, with an endgame in mind for the leader. The movie is a race against time to find MODOK, and I also wanted to use this movie to introduce Amadeus Cho, which we'll also see in Young Avengers in Phase 5, who becomes, in this film, totally awesome Hulk, while helping Ant-Man to find whoever is manipulating Cassie and torturing her. I wanted to have him in the movie because I thought he would be a really good addition. And MODOK and the leader, at the end of this film, are incarcerated in the raft alongside the Red Hulk, with the leader in a room where he can't manipulate people, because I know that was a big critique of Brave New World, where you have the leader and Ross essentially right next to each other, where if you really think about it, leader could just manipulate him again. I wanted him to be in a soundproof room, something like that, kind of a very isolationist environment where he can't manipulate anyone at the end of this film, with the mid-credit scene having Ms. Marvel meet Cassie Lang and trying to recruit her. Ant-Man and the Wasp, of course, with what Cassie just went through, are both against it, but the mid-credit scene ends with Cassie saying, "I'm in." The post-credit scene of the new Ant-Man film introduces the High Evolutionary, with the Sovereign going to lead into Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. In the post-credit scene, the High Evolutionary is there with the Sovereign, and he commands Aisha to open up Adam's cocoon, and you catch a brief glimpse of Adam Warlock's forehead gem, which in this version, this is the only change that I made, is the Ego Stone, which is a remnant of Ego the Living Planet from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. The last two projects, which close out Phase 4, are Loki Season 2, which I'm going to have it exactly as it was in the current MCU. I think that show ended in a tremendous way. And lastly, to close out Phase 4, the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special on November 24th, 2023, to lead into Guardians Volume 3, which is the first film of Phase 5. So that was my Phase 4 MCU breakdown. This is what I would have if I were making Phase 4 of the MCU. As you could tell, everything kind of leads into each other. There are no real breaks as far as what characters are introduced and dropped. I really didn't like that about Phase 4 MCU, and I feel like with a little bit more tighter planning, this could have been remedied in a tremendous way. My Phase 5 video is coming soon, so I look forward to having you for that. Thank you so much for watching this video. Travelers, if you would, please drop a like, comment. I would love to hear your comments about what you thought of my Phase 4 video. And as well, if you would, if you haven't, please subscribe. I would love to have you along for the ride. Thank you again for watching this video, travelers. And as always, go with grace.